Hello, and welcome to Curious Lorenzo, a podcast where I research in real time topics that I'm curious about. Today's topic, the topic that I want to learn more about, is self-image. So, I have posted, I think, 3 episodes so far on this little podcast that I'm doing for fun, so that I can learn, new topics, new things that I'm curious about. Kind of motivates me to go and research these things. A lot of the times, if I'm curious about something, I'll leave it at that. It just starts as a curiosity, and then I get busy with life and I start doing other things, and then I just forget about it. And I end up not learning about what I was curious about. And sometimes these topics are reoccurring. Sometimes I'll think about something and I'm thinking, oh, I should learn more about that. And then I never get around to it. And then a couple weeks or months or a year passes by or whatever, and that topic comes up again. I think, oh, I should learn about that. So this podcast has been a really great way for me to sort of motivate myself to learn more about a topic. So it turns out that this podcast is more of a me thing, I guess, than a for somebody else thing, if you could say that. And that sounds selfish. I guess I mean, I would like to, if this podcast did help somebody learn a topic, that would be great. But I don't see that ever happening because if I want to be truthful with myself, I don't know much about things, and these topics that I've gone into so far, I really don't know anything about. I would like for the podcast to be a place where people can go to kind of learn with me. I think that would be great. But my motivation really is just sort of finding a way for me to discover things and to stay curious and to not get lost in like the day-to-day anxieties and worries and everything else that's going around, because there's so much in the world. So yeah, I want to do this podcast so that I can learn, so that I can, maybe hopefully share my curiosity with other people. Maybe I can spark a sort of interest in somebody to look into other things, and maybe we can be curious together. Because a lot of the times it is frustrating when you're just daily going through, and the things that are grabbing for attention are not things that you want to think about all the time. Like I know I have to pay bills. I know that people don't like each other, it seems like, in our everyday world. Especially after an election that was this divided. And then there's coronavirus and disease and death and pain and people are struggling. A lot of people are struggling in poverty and debt. And there's just a lot, and I don't have to list them all because we know of it. And you can't, at least I can't. I don't know what the general feeling is. I mean, you can't turn away from everything that's happening. It's just, it's there, and you can feel it. So I don't think you ignore those things. I think those things are going to be there, and I think that we should fight for certain things, to get out of poverty, to get out of debt, to end disease, and to try to bring healing and all of that. It just seems like a lot. And I think that every day for me, it's important that the curiosity remains, because children are curious by nature. And as adults, I think we've lost that curiosity, because we're just so busy, so consumed. So I want to bring back some curiosity in my own life. And back to the topic that I want to talk about today is self-image. And the reason I went off on this tangent was because of this podcast, talking about the podcast. But self-image is something that I have struggled with for a lot of my life. Doing this podcast is not an easy thing for me to do, especially when I go back and listen to it. I think that self-image can be a number of different things for different people. Some people tend to have maybe a negative self-image of themselves. Some people maybe have a more positive self-image of themselves. I'm not sure. I haven't looked any of this up. I don't know what the data is. All I can speak of is my own point of view and where I'm coming from. But for a lot of my life, I've had sort of a bad self-image of myself. And it's definitely coming through as I've posted a couple of these podcast episodes. It's not easy for me, like I said, to record a podcast episode because that means I have to be vulnerable to other people. And because I'm posting this out there, I'm putting this out there. And I don't generally like myself, so I don't know why other people would like me, basically. So I guess this is going to be sort of a personal podcast episode. I just, hopefully it'll be sort of healing for me to kind of get this out there. Maybe I can reflect on my own self-image. But yeah, I mean, when I listen back on my podcast episodes so far that I've posted, I have all these criticisms are going through my head. Like, I don't like his voice. I don't like, I say his, like, I don't like my voice. I don't like how I say or like these in between words, and I repeat phrases, and my vocabulary is terrible. And I don't know what I'm talking about most of the time, which is kind of the point of the podcast. But I don't know what I'm talking about, and sometimes I think I just sound kind of stupid, which is what it is. I mean, that's just what I am, who I am. To me, I sound stupid, and I think that other people might probably think the same thing. And before I posted these podcasts, sometimes I would be worried about that. Sometimes I would worry that people think I sound stupid or am stupid, or I would worry that people have the same criticisms I have for myself, that they would have those criticisms for me. I don't know if that's true or not. Probably not. I think I'm more critical on myself than what other people are. But I'm putting this out there because I know that I need to. I know that it's, number one, I want it to be fun. And number two, that I want it to be a sort of healing process, sort of a fun process, sort of a way for me to reflect on myself and kind of understand myself maybe a little bit better too. So anyways, I'm going to stop rambling on that. So self-image. What do I know about self-image before I sort of go in? Your self-image, from my knowledge, is just how you look, how you appear to yourself. And like I said, a self-image, I think, could be an extremely negative one, maybe even disgust, all the way up to maybe you think you are the best there is ever, and you just love looking in the mirror, and you just love yourself. I don't know. I don't know what that would look like, and I don't know if I've met anybody like that, but I would assume that the spectrum can run from disgust to utter just worship. I don't know if you could have a neutral self-image, though. I think that's something that I think you have to have some sort of opinion about yourself. Because yourself, that's who you're spending the most time with. That's the human you're with. That's you. So there has to be something. Like, I don't think you can have a neutral. Maybe there's an average neutral. Like, maybe some days you think you're not such a great person, but then other days you think, oh, I'm pretty good at this. I don't know. I would have to say, personally, my average if I were to be honest, would be below the neutral, below the, I would have a net negative self-image. And I don't know where other people would be on that. I think the best person I would have an idea of would be my wife, because other than myself, she's the human that I'm with the most, second after me. So I could probably have an idea of her average, I guess, self-image. So that's another thing I'm going to guess then, that there could be an average, self-image. Because your self-image, I don't think is going to be fixed. That it's going to be sort of changing up and down here and there, static. So yeah. Well, I'm going to just do what I do, and I'm going to go to the Wikipedia article. And I'm going to read this. This is it's the Wikipedia article called Self-Image. The first thing it says, the first line is not to be confused with self-awareness, self-concept, self-consciousness, self-perception, self-esteem, or self-confidence. So those are to be distinguished apart from self-image. Self-image, and this is from the article, is the mental picture, generally of a kind that is quite resistant to change, that depicts not only details that are potentially available to objective investigation by others, height, weight, hair color, etc., but also items that have been learned by persons about themselves, either from personal experiences or by internalizing the judgments of others. That is pretty interesting. In fact, I'm going to read that again, and I'm just going to maybe comment on it. Self-image is the mental picture, generally of a kind that is quite resistant to change, that depicts not only details that are potentially available to objective investigation by others, so your height, weight, hair color, etc., but also items that have been learned by persons about themselves, either from personal experiences or by internalizing the judgment of others. Self-image may consist of 4 types. So before I go into 4 types, I just want to kind of comment on this real quick. The first sentence is pretty interesting to me. It's a mental picture. It's resistant to change. So if you have, and I would wonder about this, like when your self-image is sort of put together, if that's in childhood, or maybe adolescence, or maybe early adulthood, maybe a combination of those things. But it's a mental picture that is there and it's resistant to change. So if I have a self-image that is a certain way in my mid-20s, now that I'm in my mid to late 30s, that self-image is not going to be likely to change up or down, regardless of what I accomplish or what I don't accomplish. It's not likely to change. It's resistant to change. It depicts details that are potentially available to objective investigation by others. So height, weight, hair color. This is something that contributes to my self-image. I have a self-image of what I look like. I think my race has a lot to do with my self-image. I think my weight for sure has a lot to do with my self-image. My what I perceive myself to be, as far as like, am I attractive or not, has a lot to do with my self-image. And I can answer those questions. I can tell you how I feel about those things. Maybe I'll go into that in a second, but so height, weight, hair color, those all come into play for my self-image, definitely. But also items that have been learned by persons about themselves, either from personal experiences or by internalizing the judgments of others. So it's not very often that somebody is going to judge something about you. I haven't experienced that very often. I don't think I put myself out there enough for people to sort of judge me. I think I'm worried about judgment for sure. I always have been. I've been afraid of judgment, even from a kid to now. It has prevented me from doing things, from taking risks, from taking chances. The worry of somebody judging me for something, or from even like rejection. I've been worried. I've worried about that in the past. So, yeah, that's an interesting little bit of sentence, either from personal experiences or by internalizing the judgments of others. Okay. All right. The next part I'm going to keep reading. Self-image may consist of 4 types. Self-image resulting from how an individual sees oneself. Self-image resulting from how others see the individual. Self-image resulting from how the individual perceives others see them. Some meta stuff there. Self-image resulting from how the individual perceives the individual sees oneself. So I'm going to have to kind of break these down and sort of think about these. So how an individual sees oneself. So how do I see myself? What do I look like? What's my intelligence like? Everything about me, like how do I see myself? Self-image from how others see me. So how does my wife see me? How do my kids see me? How do my peers see me? Can have something to do with my self-image. Self-image that results from how the individual perceives others see me. So there's the truth, how others see me. That's number 2. Self-image resulting from how others see the individual. And then there's how I perceive that others see me, which I think that we can make our own narrative. We can kind of build our own stories about how individuals perceive others see them. And the last one, self-image resulting from how the individual perceives the individual sees oneself. I'm honestly trying to wrap my head around this one. So self-image resulting from how the individual, so how I think that I see myself. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to go back into that a little bit. Because I don't understand. I don't understand that 4th one. Self-image resulting how the individual perceives the individual sees oneself. Yeah, not happening. The 4 types may or may not be an accurate representation of the person. All, some, or none of them may be true. A more technical term for self-image that is commonly used by social and cognitive psychologists is self-schema. And self-schema refers to a long-lasting and stable set of memories that summarize a person's beliefs, experiences, and generalizations about the self in specific behavioral domains. A person may have a self-schema based on any aspect of himself or herself as a person, including, and that goes on. But in short, the self-schema refers to a long-lasting and stable set of memories that summarize a person's beliefs, experiences, and generalizations about the self. Like any schema, and I don't know what a schema is, so I'm going to look this up. In psychology and cognitive science, a scheme describes a pattern or thought or behavior that organizes categories of information and the relationships among them. I got to read that again. In psychology and cognitive science, a scheme describes a pattern or thought or behavior, a pattern of thought or behavior that organizes categories of information and the relationships among them. Schemes have frequently been mistranslated from the original French as schema, and it goes on. Self-schemas store information about influence, store information and influence the way we think and remember. For example, research indicates that information which refers to the self is preferentially encoded and recalled in memory tests, and phenomena known as self-referential encoding. So that goes really deep into science, into the science of this, it sounds like. And I'm not going to go into that because that's pretty heavy stuff. But yeah, if I look at the article as a whole, there are some subcategories that I might want to look into here. So that was the intro, I guess, summary paragraph at the beginning of the article. But if I look through the rest of the article, it's sort of broken up into different pieces. So there's poor self-image, maintenance, residual, victimization, children's disparity, evolved awareness in mirror, physical activity, automatic activation of stereotypes and threat, women's sexual behavior, men. So the organization of this article doesn't seem like it's super well organized, but that's just me. But what I wanted to look at in here, I guess I can kind of read the first sentence of each little paragraph and decide if I want to kind of go forward. Poor self-image, I kind of talked about that with myself. I don't have the best self-image, I guess, but let me just read this first paragraph, this first sentence of this little subsection. Poor self-image may be the result of accumulated criticisms that the person collected as a child, which have led to damaging their own view of themselves. So, accumulated criticisms that the person collected as a child, which have led to damaging their own view of themselves. So I'm going to pause there and kind of maybe comment on that. I wonder if my own self-image, and I don't even have to wonder. I guess I already know that my own self-image has been dictated by my upbringing as a child. So maybe I need to reflect on that a little bit more before I comment on it. But I know that there's some factors that come into play. Maybe how a child grows up as far as like socioeconomic status. Maybe they grew up in poverty. Maybe they grew up in wealth. Maybe they're middle class. I think that might have something to do with a child's sort of development of their own self-image. I think maybe religion might have something to do with a self-image, especially because it says here accumulated criticism that a person has collected. Accumulated criticisms. So I think these criticisms could have been received from the self, like criticizing yourself. Maybe you're trying to live up to some sort of standard that a parent has set, or maybe these criticisms are from the self because you're trying to live up to a standard that's set within your own community, at your school. Maybe your school is filled with people who are just trying to hit this mark of achievement that sometimes could be hard to reach, and maybe even impossible to reach. And maybe it could be from a church. I know here in the United States, especially, the evangelical church is huge, and the Catholic Church is huge too. I can't speak too much into the Catholic Church, but growing up in the evangelical church, I can tell you that this idea of sin might, and maybe does, at least in me, has a huge impact on my own self-image. And I guess I can comment a little bit more on that. The sin piece, I didn't grow up from a baby to adulthood in the evangelical church. I kind of was introduced to the evangelical church when I was, a young kid, maybe about 8 or 9. But there's this narrative that the evangelical church kind of throws out there of sin. And it starts with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And Eve chose to sin. Then she tricked her husband into eating the fruit and sinning, which is another story by itself. I don't know if she tricked him, but she convinced him. She shared the sin. And from that point, we, as a human race, have been sinful beings. And because God is perfect, he can't look at sin. Like, God can do everything, but he can't look at sin. This isn't what I believe anymore. I'm just kind of retelling the narrative. But we are sinful beings, so sinful that God can't even look upon us, like can't even look at us, can't even think about us, because we basically disgust God with our sin. And there has been redemption in Jesus, who is God incarnate, who was sent to earth to live a perfect life, and was murdered by the Roman government, and for some reason that's the rule. These are the rules that God plays by. Like, he had to send himself in the form of a human to live a perfect life as a sacrifice, and it was kind of symbolic to the Old Testament, and how to atone for your sins you had to sacrifice some sort of animal, whether it be like a dove or a sheep or a goat or something. You had to sacrifice, and then for a moment, for some time, God can then look upon you because you had sacrificed, you had shed blood, like there was some pain that had and death had to happen in order for God to atone for your sins. But Jesus came to be that sin, the perfect sacrifice, and was killed and died. And then for some reason, I guess God, in the form of Jesus, took all of the sins of the world, future, present, past sins of everybody on earth who ever lived, was taken on him. And at that moment, God could not look upon Jesus because he was so disgustingly sinful, that he couldn't look at him. I don't know if that's biblical. Like the looking upon Jesus, like God couldn't look. I don't know if that's biblical or not. But that's just sort of the narrative that I remember it being told as. So Jesus took that sin, and then after that, he was dead for 3 days, but then rose again. And I guess, and I'm kind of telling the whole Christian story, I guess, but during those 3 days when Jesus was dead, this might just be me retelling a narrative that was shared to me from Carmen, the Christian evangelical kind of pop singer guy. But there was a music video where like it was like a boxing ring or something, and like God, like Jesus and the devil were like boxing during those 3 days, but Jesus won. Jesus was victorious and raised from the dead. So during those 3 days, Jesus was in hell, and the devil thought he had won, but then Jesus rose from the dead, and it turns out the devil didn't win. Now that as I retell this story, it's different. I don't know. I'm not going to comment on how I feel about it because I'm not sure if my sort of opinion of that has been fully well thought out. I would have to reflect more on what I think about that, but it definitely sounds a little bit strange. But that's kind of the story that Christians are told, evangelical Christians at least. And when you sin, your sin causes you yourself to be so disgusting that Jesus and God, like, they can't look at you even because you're so vile. And the only way that you can be clean, Like, because Jesus came, you don't have to like sacrifice any animals anymore, but you can just ask God to forgive you, and then you're clean again. So you do something bad, you ask God for forgiveness, and then you're good. And then God can look at you. But that's sort of the narrative that I was brought up with. And I think that might have a lot of impact on people's self-worth if they're brought up with that narrative, with that idea that sin makes you just disgusting. So kind of just commenting on that first sentence of the poor self-image, accumulated criticisms that a person collected as a child, which have led to damaging their own view of themselves. Christianity, I think, can be for sure damaging when it's thought of in that, and I happen to know the term substitutionary atonement is where the idea that Jesus had to die for our sins, and not that Jesus just, I don't know, there's other alternative ideas as to like why Jesus was here or who Jesus was, but kind of the mainstream, at least American idea of who Jesus was is because for the purpose of substitutionary atonement, like Jesus had to die in our place because we could not live a perfect life to be sinless, and in order to earn our way, we can't earn our way to like the afterlife with God. So, and if we don't repent and ask God to forgive us, and we have sin can't be with God. So you have to go where all the sin goes, and that's hell. I've questioned that a lot, being brought up in that, and these are not the worldviews that I kind of hold anymore. But just in the context of what we're talking about with self-image, I think it has a huge impact on that. All right, so what else? Negative self-image it's just talking about factors, like where can it come from? I mean, I kind of commented on that already, parents living up to standards. Maybe you're critical of yourself because you're supposed to hit this bar of achievement and you can't. So there's all that. The next section is maintenance. When people are in the position of evaluating others, self-image maintenance process can lead to more negative evaluation depending on the self-image of the evaluator. Let's read the sentence one more time. When people are in the position of evaluating others, so whether it be like a spouse or a teacher or a boss or a parent, you're evaluating others, self-image maintenance processes can lead to a more negative evaluation depending on the self-image of the evaluator. Self-image maintenance processes can lead to a more negative evaluation depending on the self-image of the evaluator. That is to say, stereotyping and prejudice may be the way individuals maintain their own self-image. When individuals evaluate a member of a stereotyped group, they are less likely to evaluate that person negatively if their self-image has been bolstered through self-affirmation procedure, and they're more likely to evaluate that person stereotypically if their self-images have been threatened by negative feedback. Individuals may restore their self-esteem by derogating the member of the stereotyped group. So, okay, I can get a bit out of that, but honestly, I don't know much about what was said in that first paragraph, so I'm not going to comment on it. It is what it is. That's the first paragraph. I'm not going to go any more into maintenance. Residual self-image is the concept that individuals tend to think of themselves as projecting a certain physical appearance or certain position of social enlightenment or lack thereof. The term was used at least as early as 1968 and was popularized by the fiction by the Matrix series, where persons who existed in a digital created world were subconsciously maintained the physical appearance that they had become accustomed to projecting. Interesting. So residual self-image is the concept that individuals tend to think of themselves as projecting a certain physical appearance or certain position of social enlightenment or lack thereof. Okay. So that's a pretty interesting idea. I didn't know, I haven't seen The Matrix in a while, in a really long time, actually, since early 2000s was when I saw it last. But what I remember of it is it is a simulation of people and your simulated person, I guess, who you are, what you look like, that's your residual self-image. I'm assuming that's what they're saying. I also watched something kind of similar to that as far as movies are concerned. It's with Bruce Willis, and he had it was called Surrogates. And they had surrogates, like these robots that basically they controlled who they were, and there was their self-image of them. It was their selves, but they were these robots, and they were controlling them from this like chair. So the world that they lived in was a reality, but they basically, it wasn't the true reality, I guess you can say. It might have been a residual self-image, like who they felt they were, or something like that. Victimization. Victims of abuse and manipulation often get trapped into a self-image of victimization. So I'm not going to comment on that either. I don't know much about that. It's talking about... Well, I'm going to take a break. Okay, I'm back. So there's a couple of more pieces of this article that I want to get into that I thought were kind of interesting, looked kind of interesting. The first one was children's disparity. And I'll just read a little bit of this paragraph and then see if I can comment on it. Children's disparity. Self-image disparity was found to be positively related to chronological age and intelligence. Two factors thought to increase, and here's one of those words that's going to trip me up, and I'm going to use my Mac to pronounce it. Concomitantly. Now, what does concomitantly mean? Concomitantly means at the same time. Okay, so two factors thought to increase concomitantly with maturity were capacity for guilt and ability for cognitive differentiation. However, males had larger self-image disparities than females. Caucasians had larger disparities and higher ideal self-images than African Americans. And socioeconomic status affected self-image differentially for the second and fifth graders. So this just sounds like it's condensing, looks like two citations. One was Katz P. Ziegler, 1967, Self-Image Disparity, a Developmental Approach, from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. And Phillips D. A. Ziegler, 1980, Children's Self-Image Disparity, Effects of Age, Socioeconomic Status, Ethnicity, and Gender. Again, from Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. So some scientific journals did some studies on self-image and children's disparity, and it's trying to condense that into 3 sentences, and I don't think there's any way that I can get all the information I need to get out of this. But what I can do is comment on what I do think is, for children, at least in my own experience, your childhood, I feel, would have a really large effect on your self-image and developing that self-image. And you kind of keep it around up until you're an adult. And I think there was I think the first paragraph of this article, this Wikipedia article, kind of commented on, you know, developing that self-image as a child, and that self-image, the self-image that you have, has a tendency not to really change that much. So when we're children, it sounds like there's a lot of different factors that come into play when we're developing our self-image. It sounds like race has something to do with that. It sounds like your gender. It sounds like your socioeconomic status. I think all of these had a play for me. Although for me, you know, if I'm taking a look at my own situation, I don't know what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, to be, you know, I'm Hispanic, so I don't know what it's like to be white, like growing up in a white family. I'm a male, so I don't know what it's like to be female. I grew up poor, so I don't know what it's like to grow up in a house that's wealthy. But from my own observation, I can see that, you know, I generally have what it seems like to me a lower self-image of myself. My opinion of myself tends to be lower a lot of the times. Sometimes I have an okay opinion, I guess. I think that's something I really need to reflect on and kind of really look at, like, what is my opinion of myself? But just from the top of my head, as I'm trying to think right now in this moment, as how, like, what do I think about myself on the day-to-day basis? I think it tends to be pretty negative. That I don't really like myself that much a lot of the times. So, and I don't know how many people feel this way or not. That's just how I feel. But I think that maybe some of this could have happened from my childhood and the adults that I was around, and maybe it could have been my own body image. It could have been a number of different factors, you know. So, and let me see if I can sort of describe some of these things. So I grew up and I was I was not exactly proud of my body, even as a young kid, I remember. I started to gain a bit of weight, probably first, second grade. You know, if you see a first or second grader, little boy, like, I mean, I'm thinking about my own son. He's a little skinny little guy, right? He's active. He's running around. Me and my wife Lindsay, we try to give our kids healthy options. We feed them. We have scheduled meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I love my parents, but I don't think we really had a lot of that structure growing up. And I don't think my parents had that structure when they were growing up. Hispanic families and I say in poverty, but like just, I guess poverty. My parents worked hard, and they, you know, they did a good job raising us and providing for us and everything else. But like our family, we didn't really have like scheduled meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The kids, we just sort of ate when we ate. And sometimes I would feel hungry, so I would make some ramen noodles and I would eat. And other times, you know, my brothers would get hungry and they would eat something, and we never really sat down for meals. And I think there might be a lot of families, I don't know if this is common among Hispanic families or people who live in poverty or whatever, but that was just the case. And I started to gain weight, and I started to notice it, and I started to feel self-conscious about my own body. And I think that's where my negative self-image started to come into play for my body image. So yeah, I mean, children are very, very highly affected about their own image of themselves. And if somebody else, maybe it's a peer, maybe it's even an adult that comments on your body, that could have a huge impact, I think, on a child. Huge impact. I was lucky. I don't think at least from my memory, I wasn't really ever made fun of for my weight. But I mean, maybe a couple times actually. I had cousins who would comment on my weight. I had maybe a couple of friends, or not friends, but just peers at my school who commented on my weight. So I was aware that I was a bigger boy. and and as a result, my own self-image kind of suffered from that. But then what really had an impact, like, and just a memory that sticks out, was this memory of me going to church. And in churches, a lot of times they do community things where people will have potlucks and get together and we'll share a meal. Everybody brings a dish. So I remember this instance where we were having a potluck, and I love food. Who doesn't love food, right? And I there was some really good food there, and I was already self-conscious about my body. I was already, thinking like I don't want to eat all the food or make people think that I'm eating all the food, because I'm a hungry boy. I'm like 11, maybe 10 years old, maybe 12 years old, somewhere in that range. So I was able to eat a lot. I mean, as any 10, 11, or 12-year-old can. My 8-year-old right now can clean out a lot of food, and like I said, he's a little skinny little guy. So being self-conscious of this, I think my first helping, I made sure not to get too much, because I didn't want people to think that, this fat kid is going to just eat all the food. So I got a little plate, and I was still hungry, and I waited for everybody, from what I thought was everybody to go through the line. But I finished that food pretty quickly, and I went back in line. I remember one of the adults stopping me and saying, "You got to make sure to eat, let everybody eat before you go back." Like, he told me. And it made me feel so horrible. Like, so horrible. It was in public. It was embarrassing. I was trying to enjoy, the meal with other people. I don't know if anybody else heard, but he just told me, and it was like a scolding sort of, don't eat any more food, because let other people get through first. And I felt so small and so like shriveled back into myself. I felt like crying, but I didn't want to cry in front of people. So I went to the back room or whatever, and I just sat there, just feeling so horrible. And I think these events in children's lives, at least in mine, can form your self-image up until adulthood. Even to this, even affecting me to this day, that I don't like to, like, if I'm having a meal, if I'm eating, I much rather prefer eating alone versus eating with other people. Like, and especially, I don't like to eat a meal while somebody else is not eating. That is just, not at all, not even a little bit. Sometimes my wife and I will talk about this, like, we'll be out and about, and maybe we have to go to somebody's house, and they have already eaten, but we haven't eaten, so we're going to get some fast food over and just bring it over and we'll eat it there. That is really hard for me to do. I can't do that. And I think it's because of these events from my childhood. So, needless to say, and I'm thinking about this for my own kids too, because I'm a parent of 3, how important it is to make sure that you don't interfere with a child's development of their own self-image. And not just interfere, but be a part of a formation of a positive self-image for your kids. I think that's so important. And all the time while I was thinking about this self-image, I remember, and my parents loved me. It was apparent, it was obvious. They loved me. They cared for me. They hugged me. They cared for me. They made sure I was fed, everything else like that. And my grandparents too. But what really stuck out to me was how really impactful the TV program Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood had. Because Mr. Rogers, in his TV program, would tell the kids, and he would talk to the kids like he was, and I remember like this as a kid, he would talk to me through the television set like he was my friend. And I remember one of the things he would always say was, "I like you just the way you are." And that was really impactful to me as a kid, especially, kind of struggling with my own body image, my own self image as a kid. Maybe I was shy. Maybe I didn't have a lot of friends because I didn't put myself out there. I didn't want to take this risk. But this other human, this adult, even though like he never knew me and I never knew him in person, he sincerely and genuinely would tell kids that you're special, you're important, and I like you the way you are. So we don't really have any programs like that on TV today, which is a shame. I think, just sad. I know they've done, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which is kind of an adaptation, I guess, of Mister Rogers' Neighborhood, but it's not the same. And I think really it's up to parents to kind of do that for their kids, to sort of, and for me it's hard a lot of the times because at least today, being a parent and trying to provide and trying to maintain a marriage and maintain a career and maintain, you know, maintaining. That's what we're doing. We're keeping our heads above water. It seems like a lot of times you forget to sort of tell your kids that they are special and that you love them the way they are. And I think that's important for their self-image. So that was kind of a long reflection, I guess, on the children's disparity. But yeah, let me go to this. There's a couple of others that I wanted to read to. I don't know if I'm going to understand any of this because it looks like they're just citations from scientific journals that are miles above my head. So I'll look at these last two little sections. I'm not going to look at women's sexual behavior or men or the automatic activation, stereotypes, and threat. But I want to look at the one here, evolved awareness in mirror. I don't know what that is, but it looks interesting. And then physical activity, and then I'll wrap this up. All right. So evolved awareness in mirror? I remember this in psychology class. When, like, at the age a child understands that the reflection they're seeing is them, and it's the self-image. So let me just read through this. This seems kind of interesting. When does a child become aware that the image in the mirror is their own? Research was done on 88 children between the ages of 3 and 24 months. Their behaviors were observed before a mirror. The results indicated that children's awareness of self-image followed 3 major age-related sequences. From about 6 through 12 months of age, the first prolonged and repeated reaction of an infant to the mirror image is that of a sociable playmate. So from 6 to 12, they just thought, oh, this is another baby. The second year of life, wariness and withdrawal appeared. Self-admiring and embarrassed behavior accompanied those avoidance behaviors starting at 14 months was shown by 75% of the subjects after 20 months of age. So after 20 months, so wariness, withdrawal, maybe they're kind of like, what is that? Is that a baby? Is that me? So maybe it wasn't, they thought, that's not me. That's a person. It's a human, but I'm going to be a little wary of that. All right. During the last part of the second year of life, so from 20 months to 24 months, 65% of the subjects demonstrated recognition of the mirror images. So by 2 years old, most kids are recognizing that is me. That's what I look like. So yeah, this is something more basic. It's not, what do I think about myself and how do I feel about myself? This is more of like, like just recognizing I have a self, I have a me, which is, you forget to think about that, but like there's a me. All right. And the last one, I'll just go in really briefly. Physical activity. Regular practice of endurance exercise was related to a more favorable body image. Wonder why. There was a strong association between participation in sports and the type of personality that tends to be resistant to drug and alcohol addiction. Physical exercise was further significantly related to scores for physical and psychological well-being. Adolescents who engaged regularly in physical activity were characterized by lower anxiety depression scores and displayed much less social behavior inhibition than their less active counterparts. So I would say that for me, when I've had the highest self-image was when I was exercising the most. When I was in high school, I would say my senior year, I made a decision that I no longer wanted to be heavy, because I was shy. I didn't feel like I was liked, especially by the opposite sex, which I was pursuing. And there was one girl in particular that I really liked. So I thought, I just need to exercise. I'm not happy with my body. I'm not happy with my self-image. So I started to run every day, and I lost a lot of weight, and I got down to a weight that I would say was probably healthy and average. And I was even on the thin side. Like when I look at my high school senior graduation pictures, I was like pretty thin. And in that time, I mean, part of me still felt like it was hard for me to get a self-image that was more positive, but I remember even getting enough courage to like take off my shirt when I was swimming and stuff like that, which was a huge deal for me. But self-image was definitely higher, and I think that one of the things that plays a role in this, and I might be wrong, I don't see this in the article here, but I would imagine there might be some studies. Just the fact of just being outside, I think, has an impact on our overall mood. When we're stuck inside, at least from my own personal observations, when I'm stuck inside, I tend to feel not so great about myself. I tend to feel like I'm stuck. But when I go outside and I can see the sky, or even if it's cloudy, if I see the clouds, I guess clouds are part of the sky. No, I'm getting down a rabbit hole, so I'm going to stop. When I can look up and see the sky, the clouds, the sunshine is shining on me, or maybe there's other weather. Maybe it's raining or snowing or sleeting or whatever. The air is there, and the scenery and the trees and grass and the ground. And here in Albuquerque, we have mountains, lots of, not lots, but we have a big mountain range called the Sandia Mountains to the east of us, that are beautiful to look at. When you're outside, I tend to feel better. And when I feel better, when my overall mood is better, I think my self-image is better too. So people who are physically active, I think a lot of those times when you're physically active, you're outside and you feel like you've accomplished something. You feel like you're doing something. You've made a sacrifice. Like, it's not easy to exercise. It wasn't easy for me to wake up every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning and run, in sub-zero temperatures in Moriarty, New Mexico. It wasn't easy for me to do that. It took a lot of discipline and sacrifice, but you feel better, like you've accomplished something, like you've done something. So, well, that's that. Self-image. I think I've learned a little bit. I think after I record this, I'm going to reflect a little bit more about my own self-image as an adult in my late 30s. I'm going to think about how I can help shape the self-image of my kids, and how to be a positive adult. I want to be Mr. Rogers, and I don't want to be that guy at my church. And yeah, I think that's it. There's nothing else I want to talk about. So thanks for joining, and I'll talk to you on the next one. Thanks.